This is the Daily Brief, one landmark court decision explained in plain English every day. Presented by FindCourtCases.com, this is your daily briefing on the law that shapes American life.
This case, Trump v. Hawaii, it wasn't some dry academic debate. This was a fight over something really fundamental. Who gets to come into this country?
And maybe more importantly, who gets to decide?
Exactly. I mean, for the people who sued, we're talking about the state of Hawaii, the Muslim Association of Hawaii, and individuals like Ismail Elshikh. This was everything.
It was about whether they'd ever see their family members again. It was about religious freedom. The stakes couldn't have been higher for them.
And on the other side, the winner, at least immediately, was pretty clear.
Oh, absolutely. The executive branch. The court basically handed them a huge affirmation of their power to restrict entry, all in the name of national security.
Which means the losers were the foreign nationals, right?
Yeah.
The people from those countries who were suddenly barred from coming here.
Yes, especially those without family or strong connections already in the U.S. Their lives were changed overnight by this.
So our mission today, as we dig into the Supreme Court's own summary of the case, is to understand why this decision still echoes so powerfully today.
We're going to focus on that tension, that constant push and pull between presidential power and the Constitution.
Okay, so let's try to boil it down to one sentence right up top, the big takeaway.
Go for it.
The Supreme Court basically said, the president has massive power given to him by Congress to block foreign nationals from entering the U.S. if he thinks they're a threat.
As long as the policy he creates doesn't explicitly name a religion on its face.
As long as it's facially neutral. We'll get into what that means.
That phrase, facially neutral, is doing a lot of work in this case. But to really get it, you have to go back to how this whole thing started. It was pretty chaotic.
It really was. It started almost the minute the president took office.
Yeah.
Remember that first executive order? The one that just, boom, shut down travel from 7 Muslim-majority countries?
That one hit the courts, and it hit a brick wall immediately. There were protests, lawsuits everywhere, so the administration had to go back to the drawing board.
And they came back with a second version, Executive Order 13780. What was different about that one?
It was a bit narrower. They took Iraq off the list, and they added a process for case-by-case waivers. It was their attempt to make it look less like a blanket ban while they did this worldwide review of vetting procedures.
So they're trying to fix the legal problems, but the one that actually makes it to the Supreme Court, that was free.
Again, right? That was Proclamation 9645. And yes, it was very different, intentionally so. This wasn't just an order. It was based on like a huge multi-agency report.
Okay, hold on. I want to slow down there. This multi-agency report sounds like it's the whole legal justification. What were they actually looking at?
They were looking at things like information sharing, Does a country report its lost or stolen passports? Do they share criminal and terrorism data with the U.S.? It was all about creating a paper trail.
A paper trail to show that the countries were chosen based on security risks, not religion.
Precisely. It allowed them to argue the policy was data-driven, which was critical because the people suing were arguing the exact opposite.
Let's talk about them. Who were the people who fought this all the way to the top?
Well, you had the state of Hawaii arguing it hurt their university, their tourism, but the real emotional core of the case came from individuals.
People like Ismail Elshikh.
Exactly. A U.S. citizen in Hawaii trying to bring his mother-in-law to the country. For him, this wasn't politics. This was his family being kept apart. That's what gives a case standing in court real, tangible harm.
And so they had the standing to sue. And they came at the proclamation with a two-pronged attack.
Right. A very powerful one. First, they said it was a statutory problem, that the president just didn't have the authority from Congress to do this.
And second,
that it was a constitutional problem. That even if he did have the power, he was using it to discriminate against a specific religion, which violates the First Amendment.
Okay, let's take the statutory one first. This all comes down to one specific part of the law, right? Section 1182.
That's the one. It's from the Immigration and Nationality Act, and it is incredibly broad.
How broad?
It says that whenever the president finds that the entry of any class of aliens would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he can just suspend their entry, period. He can impose whatever restrictions he wants.
Wait, so you're saying Congress gave the president what sounds like a blank check on immigration as long as he says the magic words, national security?
That is almost exactly how the Supreme Court read it. They pointed to a long history of courts giving broad deference to the president on national security.
So because the proclamation was tied to that big report on security flaws.
The court said that was enough. The president did his homework, he made the finding, and the court wasn't going to second guess it.
But the plaintiffs had a counterargument, didn't they? They pointed to a different law, Section 1152, that explicitly bans discriminating based on nationality when you're giving out visas.
They did. And this is the most critical legal distinction in the whole case. It's a bit in the weeds, but it's everything.
Okay, break it down for us.
Think of it in 2 steps. Getting a visa is step 1. That's like getting permission to travel to the U.S. border. The anti-discrimination law, 1152, applies there.
Okay, permission to fly.
Right. But step 2 is when you actually arrive at the border and ask to be let in. That's called admissibility or entry. And that is governed by the president's huge power under 1182.
So the court said the proclamation wasn't about who gets a visa.
They said it was about who gets to cross the border once they arrive. It was an admissibility rule. And by framing it that way, it didn't technically conflict with the anti-discrimination rule for visas.
That is an incredibly fine line. So the statutory challenge fails on that distinction.
It does. It was a very, very carefully constructed legal argument by the government. But that still left the big explosive claim.
The First Amendment, the idea that this whole thing, despite the report in the neutral language, was really just a ban on Muslims.
Yeah, exactly. The plaintiffs are saying, look at the context. Look at the president's own statements.
Yeah.
They wanted the court to apply the highest level of review, something called strict scrutiny.
Which would have made it very hard for the government to win.
Almost impossible. But the court didn't use strict scrutiny.
What did they use?
They used a much, much lower standard, rational basis review.
Which sounds a lot less intense. What does that mean in plain English?
It means the court basically just asks, is there any plausible, legitimate reason for this policy? They're not looking for the best reason or even a great one, just a rational one.
So they're just checking for a pulse, essentially.
That's a good way to put it. And because the government had that big report, the court said, yep, there's a legitimate objective here.
What were the objectives they cited?
2 things. 1, preventing people from countries with bad vetting from entering the U.S. That seems reasonable on its face.
And the second?
And 2, pressuring those countries to improve their security standards. So because the proclamation was facially neutral, it didn't say no Muslims allowed, and it was tied to those legitimate goals, it passed the low bar of rational basis review.
And this is where the dissent and a lot of people really took issue with the majority, right? They were aware of all the external context.
Oh, absolutely. Justice Sotomayor wrote a fiery dissent, essentially saying the majority was ignoring reality to uphold a policy that was rooted in religious animus.
But the majority's view was that you can't look at that stuff.
Their view was that when you have a facially neutral policy justified by national security, the court shouldn't be looking at extraneous statements. The text of the proclamation itself was what mattered. They deferred to the president.
So let's talk about the fallout from that deference. What were the lasting effects?
Well, it solidified the president's power under 1182F as one of the most potent tools in the executive toolkit. It sent a clear message that the court is very, very reluctant to interfere in immigration decisions that are framed as national security.
So why are we still talking about this today? I mean, it's been years. Why does it still matter so much?
Because it set a massive precedent. First, any future president now has a clear roadmap for how to implement broad travel restrictions. The playbook is there.
Frame it around a risk assessment, make it facially neutral.
Exactly. And second, and this is maybe the bigger point, it raises this ongoing burning question about judicial review. How much context should courts look at? When the government says national security, should the courts just take their word for it?
That debate feels more alive than ever.
It is. It touches everything. It's not just about immigration. That question of deference to the executive branch is everywhere.
So if you had to synthesize the court's final decision one last time, what's the bottom line?
The bottom line is that the proclamation was upheld because it was, first, based on a documented multi-agency review. Second, it was carefully tailored to be a restriction on admissibility, not visa issuance. And those 2 things, together, put it squarely within the president's broad delegated power.
Which brings us to the end of this deep dive. At the end of the day, Trump v. Hawaii was a showdown between national security power and claims of constitutional discrimination.
And in this case, deference to the executive's national security claims won out.
And that really leaves us with a final provocative thought to chew on.
Yeah.
In a crisis, we want the government to be able to act fast. But when they justify a huge policy by saying national security, how much proof should we or the courts demand before we accept it? At what point does that necessary deference start to look like a free pass?
And how do you protect fundamental rights, even for people who aren't citizens, without tying the hands of the government in a genuine emergency? That's the balance, and this case shows just how hard it is to get it right.
You've been listening to The Daily Brief, one landmark court decision explained in plain English every day. Presented by FindCourtCases.com, this is your daily briefing on the law that shapes American life. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with the next case.